for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host. Donald Trump is disqualified from running in Colorado for President of the United States. That's according to the Colorado Supreme Court ruling earlier this week. We will talk about that. A binder from the Trump administration that contained raw Russian intelligence has disappeared and nobody seems to know where it is. Does Donald Trump have it? Does somebody from his administration have it? Who, in fact, has it? We'll talk about that. Trump also made some comments about immigrants poisoning the nation's blood, and now he's defending those comments. We will talk about that in just a little bit. Plus, we'll have some news from Ottawa County, Michigan, the latest happenings there. Before we get into today's topics, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us at X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording this show on Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. And before we get into the topics today, I want to read this. This is the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Having to do with insurrections, disqualification from office for insurrection or rebellion. This is the language that is in the U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment, Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Now, that's the important part right there. So let's get to our very first story. This is Nicholas Riccardi writing for the Associated Press. This is dated December 19th out of Denver, Colorado. This is the best news I have heard all year long. A divided Colorado Supreme Court on Tuesday declared Donald Trump ineligible for the White House under the U.S. Constitution's insurrection clause and removed him from the state's presidential primary ballot, setting up a likely showdown in the nation's highest court to decide whether the frontrunner for the GOP nomination can remain in the race. The decision from a court whose justices were all appointed by Democratic governors marks the first time in history that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has been used to disqualify a presidential candidate. In its 4-3 decision, the court wrote this, quote, "A majority of the court holds that Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment." End of quote. Colorado's highest court overturned a ruling from a district court judge who found that Trump incited an insurrection for his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Let me add, traitorous attack on the Capitol, because those people are, were, and will always be traitors. But said that he cannot be barred from the ballot because it was unclear that the provision was intended to cover the presidency. No, it's pretty crystal clear. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state if they have previously taken an oath and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion. Crystal clear. The court stayed its decision until January 4th or until the U.S. Supreme Court rules on the case. Colorado officials say the issue must be settled by January 5th, the deadline for the state to print its presidential primary ballots. The court's majority wrote this, quote, "We do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are mindful of the magnitude and weight of the questions now before us. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the law mandates we reach." End of quote. Trump's attorneys had promised to appeal any disqualification immediately to the nation's highest court, which has the final say about constitutional matters. In a statement Tuesday night, Trump's legal spokeswoman, Alina Habba, said this, quote, "This ruling issued by the Colorado Supreme Court attacks the very heart of this nation's democracy. It will not stand, and we trust that the Supreme Court will reverse this unconstitutional order." End of quote. I have a feeling our bull is going to have a lot of hemorrhoid issues by the time this show is done, because I'm in a mood today. I'm just going to warn all you listeners and all you affiliates, I'm in a foul mood, so get ready. Trump didn't mention the decision during a rally Tuesday evening in Waterloo, Iowa, but his campaign sent out a fundraising email citing what it called a, quote, tyrannical ruling, end of quote. Yeah, no, tyrannical is when you were in charge there, buddy. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel labeled the decision, quote, election interference, end of quote. She said the RNC's legal team intends to help Trump fight the ruling. Trump lost Colorado by 13 percentage points in 2020 and doesn't need the state to win next year's presidential election. But the danger for Trump is that more courts and election officials will follow Colorado's lead and exclude Trump from must-win states, like Michigan, which unfortunately ruled that they can't do anything about it. Yes, they can. Read Amendment 14, Section 3. It's crystal clear. Are we clear? Crystal. Just like a few good men. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed nationally to disqualify Trump under Section 3, which was designed to keep former Confederates from returning to government after the Civil War. It bars from office anyone who swore an oath to support the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against it. It's only been used a handful of times since the decade after the Civil War. Derek Muller, a Notre Dame law professor who has closely followed the Section 3 cases, said this after Tuesday's ruling, quote, "I think it may embolden other state courts or secretaries to act now that the bandage has been ripped off. This is a major threat to Trump's candidacy." End of quote. Oh, that's good for news for me. Yes, it is. The Colorado case is the first where the plaintiffs succeeded. By the way, let me tell you who those plaintiffs were. 6 Colorado Republicans. Oh boy, yeah, we'll get into more detail about that. It wasn't Democrats that did this; it was their own Republicans. 11th commandment thrown out the window again. I love it. After a week-long hearing in November, District Judge Sarah B. Wallace found that Trump indeed had engaged in insurrection by inciting the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Let me add, traitorous attack. and her ruling that kept him on the ballot was a fairly technical one. Trump's attorneys convinced Wallace that because the language in Section 3 refers to officers of the United States who take an oath to support the Constitution, it must not apply to the president, who is not included as an officer of the United States elsewhere in the document, and whose oath is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Oh, so they're splitting hairs over the language. So that's what they're doing. Well, that's not going to fly. Not with me. If not with the Supreme Court. If they're smart, which most of them aren't. Bunch of people in a black robe that think they're God. That's what judges are. Period. End of story. The provision also says offices covered include senator, representative, electors of the president and vice president, and all under the United States, but does not name the presidency. Well, it's included under others. Duh! The state's highest court didn't agree, siding with attorneys for 6 Colorado Republican and unaffiliated voters who argued that it was nonsensical to imagine that the framers of the amendment, fearful of former Confederates returning to power, would bar them from low-level offices, but not the highest one in the land. Well, that makes sense. The court's majority opinion said this, quote, Trump asks us to hold that Section 3 disqualifies every oath-breaking insurrectionist except the most powerful one, and that it bars oath-breakers from virtually every office, both state and federal, except the highest one in the land. Both results are inconsistent with the plain language and history of Section 3. End of quote. The left-leaning group that brought the Colorado case, CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, hailed the ruling. Their president, Noah Bookbinder, said in a statement, quote, Our Constitution clearly states that those who violate their oath by attacking our democracy are barred from serving in government. End of quote. Bingo! Bingo! Trump's attorneys had also urged the Colorado High Court to reverse Wallace's ruling that Trump incited the January 6th traitorous attack. His lawyers argued that Trump had simply been using his free speech rights and hadn't called for violence. Really? Bullshit! Trump attorney Scott Gessler also argued the attack was more of a riot than an insurrection. What's the difference? What's the difference between the two? Duh! Jesus Christ, these people. That met skepticism from several of the justices. Justice William W. Hood III said during the December 6 arguments, quote, Why isn't it enough that a violent mob breached the Capitol when Congress was performing a core constitutional function? In some ways, that seems like a poster child for insurrection. End of quote. Yeah, you got that right. Got that right. In the ruling issued Tuesday, the court's majority dismissed the arguments that Trump wasn't responsible for his supporters' violent attack, which was intended to halt Congress's certification of the presidential vote. They wrote this, quote, Trump then gave a speech in which he literally exhorted his supporters to fight at the Capitol. End of quote. Bingo! Bingo! Colorado Supreme Court Justices Richard L. Gabriel, Melissa Hart, Monica Marquez, and Hood ruled for the petitioners. Chief Justice Brian D. Boatwright dissented, arguing the constitutional questions were too complex to be solved in a state hearing. Justices Maria E. Birkencotter and Carlos Simor also dissented. Simor wrote this, quote, Our government cannot deprive someone of the right to hold public office without due process of law. They got their due process. It's called the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Even if we are convinced that a candidate committed horrible acts in the past, dare I say engaged in insurrection, there must be procedural due process before we can declare that individual disqualified from holding public office. End of quote. They had their due process. They violated Amendment 14, Section 3. Period. End of story. That's their due process. Their due process was voted in after the Union beat the Confederates in 1865. The only way Trump can serve is if Congress votes 2/3 to pass them by. That's in the Constitution. The Colorado ruling stands in contrast with the Minnesota Supreme Court, which last month decided that the state party can put anyone it wants on its primary ballot. It dismissed a Section 3 lawsuit, but said the plaintiffs could try again during the general election. In another 14th Amendment case, a Michigan judge ruled that Congress, not the judiciary, should decide whether Trump can stay on the ballot. That ruling is being appealed. The liberal group behind those cases, Free Speech for People, also filed another lawsuit in Oregon seeking to bounce Trump from the ballot there. Both groups are financed by liberal donors who also support President Joe Biden. Trump has blamed the president for the lawsuits against him, even though Biden has no role in them, saying his rival is, quote, defacing the Constitution, end of quote, to try to end his campaign. Really? Trump's allies rushed to his defense, slamming the decision as un-American and insane and part of a politically motivated effort to destroy his candidacy. House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik said in a statement, quote, 4 partisan Democrat operatives on the Colorado Supreme Court think they get to decide for all Coloradans and Americans the next presidential election. End of quote. Well, tell you what, I think they do. Bingo! Bingo! Elise Stefanik is a fucking moron. Yes, I said it, Elise. You are a moron. Imbecile. Unbelievable. Well, I guess we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say about this. I can already guarantee 5-4 ruling the Trump's allowed to run. Because Republicans coddle their criminals. Democrats punish their criminals. They do. Period. Over the years on this very show, we have talked about how Democrats prosecute and punish their criminals. The perfect example that we always use on this show is former Democratic Representative William Jefferson out of Louisiana. Why? He hid $80,000 in cash in his freezer. He was taking bribes and he hid the actual cash in the freezer and he got caught and he got bounced out of Congress. So Jefferson was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He was released after 5.5 after multiple appeals. But this scumbag is never going to get it back into Congress ever again, and he shouldn't. Really. It's unbelievable, folks. Like I said, Republicans, they coddle their criminals, protect them at any cost. You know, the same people that have been quote-unquote anti-Trump turn around at this news out of Colorado and they begin to fillet him. Yes, I said it. I don't care. Chris Christie, oh, but Trump, he deserves his day in court and blah, 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 blah. And Ramaswamy, he says he's going to take himself off of the Colorado ballot in solidarity with Trump. But he's one of the biggest Trumpers there is. He's god-awful. Look at some of the stuff he wants to do. Trump's the absolute worst, but Ramaswamy, and for that matter, governor death sentence out of Florida, they're both equally as bad. In fact, all the Republicans are just terrible. Absolutely terrible. It's just the degree of terrible that you get with each one. But then they say, oh, we're against Trump, like Chris Christie, Nikki Haley. I'm a never-Trumper, you know. I'm sure Liz Cheney, I'd love to know her opinion about this because she's a never-Trumper. But I'm sure that she's probably flating Trump right now over all this. Oh, no, he needs to have his day in court. I guarantee, you know what? I think I'm going to have to find that. I just did a quick search and I have not been able to find any comments from Liz Cheney about the Colorado Supreme Court ruling. But like I said, we're going to keep an eye on this because this is interesting stuff right here. Something else we're definitely going to keep an eye on. This is a story that CNN broke just a few days ago. And this should infuriate everybody, and it should scare the hell out of people if they think Donald Trump's going to get back in. This should be what scares the living hell out of you. This is CNN, Jeremy Herb, Katie Bo-Lillis, Natasha Bertrand, Evan Perez, and Zachary Cohen writing. This is dated December 15th out of Washington. This is I'm going to warn you, this is a very lengthy article, but we're going to stick with it. A binder containing highly classified information related to Russian election interference went missing at the end of Donald Trump's presidency, raising alarms among intelligence officials that some of the most closely guarded national security secrets from the U.S. and its allies could be exposed. That is according to sources familiar with the matter who told this to CNN. The sources said that its disappearance, which has not been previously reported, was so concerning that intelligence officials briefed Senate Intelligence Committee leaders last year about the missing materials and the government's efforts to retrieve them. In the 2+ years since Trump left office, the missing intelligence does not appear to have been found. So it's still missing. The binder contained raw intelligence the U.S. and its NATO allies collected on Russians and Russian agents, including sources and methods that informed the U.S. government's assessment that Russian President Vladimir Putin sought to help Trump win the 2016 election. That's according to the same sources. The intelligence was so sensitive that lawmakers and congressional aides with top-secret security clearances were able to review the material only at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, where their work scrutinizing it was itself kept in a locked safe. The binder was last seen at the White House during Trump's final days in office. Trump had ordered it brought there so he could declassify a host of documents related to the FBI's Russia investigation. Under the care of then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, the binder was scoured by Republican aides working to redact the most sensitive information so it could be declassified and released publicly. The Russian intelligence was just a small part of the collection of documents in the binder, described as being 10 inches thick and contains reams of information about the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation into the 2016 Trump campaign and Russia. But the raw intelligence on Russia was among its most sensitive classified materials, and top Trump administration officials repeatedly tried to block Trump from releasing the documents. The day before leaving office, Trump issued an order declassifying most of the binder's contents, setting off a flurry of activity in the final 48 hours of his presidency. Multiple copies of the redacted binder were created inside the White House, with plans to distribute them across Washington to Republicans in Congress and right-wing journalists. Instead, copies initially sent out were frantically retrieved at the direction of White House lawyers demanding additional redactions. Just minutes before Joe Biden was inaugurated, Meadows rushed to the Justice Department to hand-deliver a redacted copy for a last review. Years later, the Justice Department is yet to release all of the documents despite Trump's declassification order. Additional copies with varying levels of redactions ended up at the National Archives. But an unredacted version of the binder containing the classified raw intelligence went missing amid the chaotic final hours of the Trump White House. The circumstances surrounding its disappearance remain shrouded in mystery. U.S. officials repeatedly declined to discuss any government efforts to locate the binder or confirm that any intelligence was missing. The binder was not among the classified items found in last year's search of Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, according to a U.S. official familiar with the matter, who said the FBI was not looking specifically for intelligence related to Russia when it obtained a search warrant for Trump's residence last year. There's also no reference to the binder or the missing Russian intelligence in the June indictment of Trump over the mishandling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. One theory has emerged about the binder's whereabouts. Cassidy Hutchinson, one of Meadows' top aides, testified to Congress and wrote in her memoir that she believes Meadows took home an unredacted version of the binder. She said it had been kept in Meadows' safe and that she saw him leave with it from the White House. Hutchinson told the January 6th committee in closed-door testimony, Quote, I am almost positive it went home with Mr. Meadows, end of quote. That is according to transcripts released last year. A lawyer for Meadows, however, strongly denies that Meadows mishandled any classified information at the White House, saying any suggestion Meadows was responsible for classified information going missing was, quote, flat wrong, end of quote. Meadows' attorney George Terwilliger said in a statement to CNN, quote, Mr. Meadows was keenly aware of and adhered to the requirements for the proper handling of classified material. Any such material that he handled or was in his possession has been treated accordingly, and any suggestion that he is responsible for any missing binder or other classified information is flat wrong. Anyone and any entity suggesting that he is responsible for anything missing does not have facts and should exercise great care before making false allegations. End of quote. Really? Nope. Once a crook, always a crook, and Republicans are crooks. My opinion. My opinion. In the years since Trump left office, his allies have pursued the redacted binder so they can release it publicly, suing the Justice Department and the National Archives earlier this year. And Trump's lawyers are now seeking access to the classified intelligence from the 2016 election assessment as they prepare for his defense against charges stemming from efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This account of the classified binder's journey to the White House, how its trail went cold once Trump left office, and the lingering questions it raises is based on interviews with more than a dozen sources familiar with the matter, all of whom requested anonymity to discuss the sensitive issue. The CIA, the FBI, the National Archives, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence declined to comment for this story. A spokeswoman for the Senate Intelligence Committee declined comment. A lawyer for Hutchinson also declined comment. A spokesman for Trump did not respond to a request for comment. The missing binder is at the heart of one of the most contentious fights waged behind the scenes by Donald Trump. Despite fierce opposition from his own national security officials, Trump spent years trying to declassify material that he said would prove his claims to the FBI's Russia probe into his campaign was a hoax. The binder's origins trace back to 2018 when Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, led by Chairman Devin Nunes, compiled a classified report alleging the Obama administration skewed intelligence in its assessment that Putin had worked to help Trump in the 2016 election. The GOP report, which criticized the intelligence community's tradecraft, scrutinized the highly classified intelligence from 2016 that informed the assessment Putin and Russia sought to assist Trump's campaign. House Republicans cut a deal with the CIA in which the committee brought in a safe for its documents that was then placed inside a CIA vault, a setup that prompted some officials to characterize it as a turducken, or a safe within a safe. It's a turducken, all right. It's a chicken inside of a duck inside of a turkey. That's about what it is, folks. Republican and Democratic sources disagreed on the substance of the report. GOP sources familiar with its details said the report argued the intelligence community assessment was skewed by senior Obama administration officials to exclude intelligence suggesting that Russia actually wanted Hillary Clinton to win in 2016, while overemphasizing the significance of intelligence indicating that Russia preferred Trump. Democratic sources, however, say the Republican allegations were overblown. One source said the intelligence referenced in the report actually proved the opposite of what Republicans were claiming, saying it showed that Russia was meddling in U.S. elections and seeking to personally manipulate Trump and help him win. The Democratic view was corroborated in 2020 by the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee, which concluded that the 2016 assessment was a sound intelligence product and that analysts were under no political pressure to reach specific conclusions, undercutting Nunes's allegations. Nunes, who left Congress to become the CEO of Trump's media company, provided a statement in response to questions mocking CNN for focusing on, quote, secret Trump binders, end of quote. Nunez's 2018 report became one of many documents connected to the Russia investigation that Trump and his allies wanted to make public. But Trump's national security leaders, particularly CIA Director Gina Haspel, vehemently resisted public release of the report and other Russia documents, fearing the exposure of sources and methods. The disagreement followed Haspel throughout her tenure in the Trump administration. Trump privately made clear that he wanted to get his hands on the GOP report. During one exchange in October 2020, Trump suggested he should personally visit CIA headquarters and demand access to it, according to a source familiar with the conversation. Can you imagine that orange blowhard? I'm the President of the United States and I demand to see this document. Yeah, it just sounds like Trump. And then when he's told no, he throws a temper tantrum and kicks and screams and beats on the floor. Yeah, that's Donald Trump too. Orange baby. Needs his diaper changed and his ass whipped. In the lead-up to the 2020 election, two Trump intelligence leaders, Acting Director of National Intelligence Richard Grenell and his successor John Ratcliffe, declassified some documents and intelligence related to Russia and the FBI. But the House Republican report remained classified. Trump considered firing Haspel after the election as he pushed to release more information about the Russia investigation. At least one Trump advisor floated replacing Haspel with Kash Patel. Oh, Jesus Christ. That's a scary thought. Patel at the time was an aide to Nunez in 2018 when the GOP report was drafted. In 2019, Patel went to work for Trump on the National Security Council before becoming chief of staff to the acting defense secretary in Trump's final months. And by the way, Kash Patel is the one that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago on this show that wants to hunt down all of Trump's enemies and imprison them. He said it, folks. This is scary stuff. You need to be aware of this. And you need to make your MAGA friends aware of this. In December 2020, then Attorney General William Barr worked with Ratcliffe to dissuade Trump from declassifying at least a subset of the intelligence related to Russia, arguing that it would damage national security, sources familiar with the matter said. Other current and former officials say Barr and aides in his office also pushed the FBI and the intelligence agencies to satisfy Trump's demands and make public more of the information, pressure that continued after Barr left office. At one point after the election, Haspel, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and NSA Director General Paul Nakasone trekked to Capitol Hill on short notice to speak to congressional intelligence leaders about their deep concerns of Trump possibly releasing the material, sources said. On December 19th, 4 days after Barr announced his resignation, Nunez met with Meadows at the White House to discuss how to declassify documents related to the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign and Russia. That's according to Hutchinson's testimony to Congress. 11 days later, sources say that a copy of the Republican report was brought to the White House as one part of the massive binder of documents on Russia and the FBI investigation. Hutchinson told the January 6th committee she signed for the documents when they arrived at the White House. Over the next few days, Meadows discussed the documents with then White House counsel Pat Cipollone and also met with Republican staffers from the House Intelligence Committee to review them, according to Hutchinson. In his book about his time as Trump's chief of staff, Meadows wrote that Trump demanded the documents be brought to the White House. He wrote, quote, "I personally went through every page to make sure that Trump's declassification would not inadvertently disclose sources and methods," end of quote. Yeah, I'm sure he did. Along with the Republican report scrutinizing the intelligence on Russia, the binder's contents included the FBI's problematic foreign intelligence surveillance warrants on a Trump campaign advisor from 2017, interview notes with Christopher Steele, author of the infamous dossier on Trump and Russia, FBI reports from a confidential human source related to the Russia investigation, and internal FBI and DOJ text messages and emails, among other documents. The version of the binder Hutchison signed for was kept in Meadows' office safe, she testified, except when it was being worked on by congressional staffers. Hutchison told the January 6th committee, quote, he wanted to keep that one close hold. He did not want that one to be widely known about. I just know Mr. Meadows. He wouldn't have had that one copied unless he did it on his own. But I don't think he knows how to use a copy machine. End of quote. Yeah, that's about right. In her book, Hutchison recalled the moment when Meadows asked her to retrieve the binder and complained when she told him it was in the safe. Meadows told her, quote, I told you not to let it out of your sight. It should have been in your desk drawer. End of quote. Hutchison wrote that she responded this way, quote, my desk drawer, Mark, is not where classified documents belong. It was in the safe. You have nothing to worry about. End of quote. Once the committee aides completed their proposed redactions, additional copies were made at the White House so the binder could be declassified and released. Meanwhile, at the FBI, top officials scrambled to protect the most sensitive details and limit the damage of what they felt were insufficient redactions. According to a source who read portions of the letter to CNN, a top FBI official wrote to White House officials, quote, any further declassification would reveal sensitive intelligence collection techniques, damage foreign partner relations, jeopardize United States intelligence community equities, potentially violate court orders limiting the dissemination of FISA information, and endanger confidential human sources. End of quote. On January 19, 2021, Trump issued a declassification order for a, quote, binder of materials related to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Crossfire Hurricane investigation, end of quote. The White House had planned to distribute the declassified documents around Washington, including to right-wing journalist and Trump ally John Solomon. But Trump's order did not lead to its release, and earlier this year, Solomon sued the Justice Department and National Archives for access to the documents. His court filings provide colorful details of the last-minute scramble. Solomon claims that on the night of January 19th, Meadows invited him to the White House to review several hundred pages of the declassified binder. One of Solomon's staffers was even allowed to leave the White House with the declassified records in a paper bag. Wow, brown bagging it. Unbelievable. Solomon's attorneys wrote in a court filing last month, quote, Mr. Solomon's staff began setting up a scanning operation for the complete set of documents to be released the next morning. But as they set up the equipment, they received a call from the White House asking that the documents still under embargo be returned because the White House wished to make some additional redactions to unclassified information under the Privacy Act. End of quote. Hutchison writes in her book that Cipollone told her after 10:30 p.m. on January 19th to have Meadows retrieve the binders that had been given to Solomon and a right-wing columnist. Hutchison writes that Cipollone told her, quote, the Crossfire Hurricane binders are a complete disaster. They're still full of classified information. Those binders need to come back to the White House, like now, end of quote. The documents were returned the next morning on January 20th after they were picked up by a Secret Service agent in a Whole Foods grocery bag, according to Hutchinson. Jesus. Unbelievable, folks. This is the Trump White House. Secret documents being passed about in a grocery bag. On the morning of January 20th, the final day of the Trump presidency, Meadows rushed to the Justice Department to turn over a copy of the binder Trump ordered declassified for a final review. Hutchison told the committee that sometime between 11 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. that morning, Meadows emerged from the White House in a hurry to deliver a copy of the binder to the Justice Department. Hutchison recalled Meadows asking his security detail, quote, how quickly can we get this to DOJ, end of quote. Meadows also delivered a memo instructing the Justice Department to conduct its own privacy review of the bulk of the documents Trump had declassified before they were released. Meadows wrote in the memo, quote, I am returning the bulk of the binder of declassified documents to the Department of Justice, including all that appear to have a potential to raise privacy concerns. with the instruction that the department must expeditiously conduct a Privacy Act review under the standards that the Department of Justice would normally apply, redact material appropriately, and release the remaining material with redactions applied. End of quote. Solomon's lawyers contend in a legal filing that Meadows, quote, promised Mr. Solomon that he would receive the revised binder. However, this never occurred. End of quote. As for the unredacted version of the binder, Hutchison writes in her book that she saw Meadows get into his limo the night of January 19th with the, quote, original Crossfire Hurricane binder tucked under his arm. End of quote. Hutchison recalled asking herself as Meadows drove away, quote, what the hell is Mark doing with the unredacted Crossfire Hurricane binder? End of quote. When she looked in Meadows' safe for the last time before she left the White House, Hutchison said it was gone. She told the January 6th committee, quote, I don't think that would have been something that he would have destroyed. It was not returned anywhere, and it never left our office to go internally anywhere. It stayed in our safe, in the office safe most of the time. End of quote. Terwilliger, an attorney for Meadows, disputes Hutchinson's account, saying Meadows did not mishandle any classified documents at the White House. Even after Trump left office, the hunt for the binder continued on multiple fronts. Roughly a year after Trump left office, Senate Intelligence Committee leaders were briefed by intelligence officials about the disappearance of the raw Russian intelligence contained in the unredacted version of the binder and the government's efforts to retrieve it, sources told CNN. At the same time, Trump's allies sought to regain access to the declassified version of the binder that Meadows had taken to the Justice Department. In June 2022, Trump named Solomon and Patel as his representatives to the National Archives, who were authorized to view Trump's records. Solomon's lawsuit included email correspondence showing how Solomon and Patel tried to get access to the binder as soon as they were named as Trump's representatives. Solomon wrote in June 2022 to Gary Stern, the Archives General Counsel, quote, there is a binder of documents from the Russia investigation that Trump declassified with an order in his last few days in office. It's about 10 inches thick. We'd like to make a set of copies, digital or paper format, of every document that was declassified by his order and included in the binder. End of quote. In February and March, the FBI released under the Freedom of Information Act several hundred pages of heavily redacted internal records from its Russia investigation following lawsuits from conservative groups seeking documents from the probe. The Justice Department said in a June filing seeking to dismiss Solomon's lawsuit that the FBI's documents released had fulfilled Meadows' request for a Privacy Act review, noting that it had, quote, resulted in the posting of most of the binder, end of quote, on the FBI's FOIA website. Solomon responded claiming the documents that the FBI released were only, quote, a small part of the binder's contents with substantial additional redactions, end of quote. Last July, Meadows said in an interview with Solomon that he turned over the documents to the Justice Department out of an abundance of caution. Meadows said, quote, we gave them those declassified documents. I want to stress they were declassified documents to do a final redaction for some of that personal information with the instruction that they were to go ahead and disseminate those. We expected fully that they would do that at the most a few days, but here we are a few years later, end of quote. So there you go, folks. Donald Trump passing out documents, leaving the White House in grocery bags, Whole Foods grocery bags, to right-wing reporters. This is the stuff of dictators, of fascists. This is what fascists do. You better be aware of this, folks. You're being warned right now of what Trump is capable of. We've told you what he's planning on doing. He said, day one, I'm going to be a dictator. That should automatically disqualify him from running ever again, for dog catcher even. Jeez. Speaking of the orange pig, let's continue with this story. This is Hannah Fingerhut and Allie Swenson writing for the Associated Press. This is dated December 19th out of Waterloo, Iowa. Donald Trump on Tuesday defended his comments about migrants crossing the southern border quote, poisoning the blood, end of quote, of America. And he reinforced the message while denying any similarities to fascist writings others had noted. Referencing Adolf Hitler's fascist manifesto, Trump said at a campaign rally in Waterloo, Iowa, quote, I've never read Mein Kampf, end of quote. Really? Bullshit. I bet he's read it from cover to cover. I guarantee it. Trump said Tuesday that immigrants in the U.S. illegally are, quote, destroying the blood of our country. They're destroying the fabric of our country, end of quote. Wow. In the speech to over 1,000 supporters from a podium flanked by Christmas trees and red MAGA hats, Trump responded to mounting criticism about his anti-immigrant blood purity rhetoric over the weekend. Several politicians and extremism experts have noted his language echoed writings from Hitler about the purity of Aryan blood, which underpinned Nazi Germany's systematic murder of millions of Jews and other undesirables before and during World War II. As illegal border crossings surged, topping 10,000 some days in December, Trump continued to blast Biden for allowing migrants to pour into our country. He alleged without offering evidence that they bring crime and potential disease with them. Lamenting what he said was a border catastrophe, Trump said, quote, they come from Africa, they come from Asia, they come from South America, end of quote. Really? Yeah. Trump has long used inflammatory language about immigrants coming to the U.S. dating back to his campaign launch in 2015 when he said immigrants from Mexico are, quote, bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, end of quote. Well, takes one to know one, Donnie, because you are a rapist. Or are you a racist? Or are you both? My opinion. But Trump has espoused increasingly authoritarian messages in his third campaign, vowing to renew and add to his effort to bar citizens from certain Muslim-majority countries and to expand ideological screening for people immigrating to the U.S. He said he would be a dictator on day one only in order to close the border and increase drilling. You know what? The United States is drilling more oil than it ever has in its entire existence, so stop that bullshit. According to a late 2021 poll by the Associated Press and the NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, about 1/3 of Americans overall worry that more immigration is causing U.S.-born Americans to lose their economic, political, and cultural influence. No, folks, it's not immigrants that's causing this. It's the rich. Rich people are causing U.S.-born Americans to lose their economic, political, and cultural influence. I've said it for over 10 years on this show. 50-year-old Jackie Malesic of Waterloo said she likes Trump for the reasons that many people don't, how outspoken he is, and that he's a little bit of a loose cannon. But she thought Trump saying immigrants are poisoning the blood took it a little too far. She said, quote, I'm very much for cutting off what's happening at the border now. There's too many people pouring in here right now. I watch it every single day. But that wording is not what I would have chosen to say, end of quote. Malesic supports allowing legal immigration and accepting refugees, but she is concerned about the waves of migrants crossing the border who are not being vetted. Senator J.D. Vance, Republican of Ohio, lashed out at a reporter asking about Trump's poisoning the blood comments, defending them as a reference to overdoses from fentanyl smuggled over the border. Ah! He's trying to tie it to that. That's a stretch. That is a big stretch there, buddy. Vance said, quote, you just framed your question implicitly assuming that Donald Trump is talking about Adolf Hitler. It is obvious, yeah, you know what he is. Yeah, right there it is. It's obvious that he was talking about the very clear fact that the blood of Americans is being poisoned by a drug epidemic. End of quote. Either J.D. Vance is idiotic enough to really believe this, or he's absolutely so full of shit that his eyes are brown. It's one or the other, and I think it's the bottom. At a congressional hearing July 12th, James Mandrick, a Custom and Border Protection Deputy and Assistant Commissioner, said 73% of fentanyl seizures at the border since the previous October were smuggling attempts carried out by U.S. citizens, the rest being done by Mexican citizens. So there you go, folks. It's U.S. citizens that's bringing the drugs over here. That's according to Customs and Border Protection. Extremism experts say Trump's rhetoric resembles the language that white supremacist shooters have used to justify mass killings. John Lewis, a research fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism, pointed to the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooter and the 2019 El Paso Walmart shooter, who he said used similar language in writings before their attacks. Lewis said, quote, "Call it what it is. This is fascism. This is white supremacy. This is dehumanizing language that would not be out of place in a white supremacist signal or telegram chat." End of quote. Asked about Trump's poisoning the blood comments, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell replied with a quip about his own wife, an immigrant who was an appointee in Trump's administration. McConnell said, quote, "Well, it strikes me that it didn't bother him when he appointed Elaine Chao Secretary of Transportation." End of quote. Yes, that's my Mitch McConnell voice. Turtle-looking bastard. Trump currently leads other candidates by far in polls of likely Republican voters in Iowa and nationwide. Trump's campaign is hoping for a knockout performance in the caucuses that will deny his rivals momentum and allow him to quickly lock up the nomination. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has staked his campaign on Iowa, raising expectations for him there. Of winning Iowa next month, Trump said, quote, "I will not guarantee it, but I pretty much guarantee it." End of quote. Yeah. Unbelievable. Orange pig bastard. Just gonna call it what it is, folks. I'm done being nice. Nice doesn't get you anywhere. Mean gets you everywhere. And I mean everywhere. And I want to get real quickly to our last story here about Ottawa County, Michigan. This is Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated December 19th. 4 social recreational programs in Ottawa County will have funding for the next 6 months after a somewhat volatile Community Mental Health Board of Directors meeting on Monday, December 18th. In September, the board was tasked with approving 63 annual contracts for the upcoming fiscal year, which began October 1st. Among them was the $290,799.92 contract for the Momentum Center, which has drawn the ire of Ottawa Impact and its supporters over its focus on social determinants, according to the center's director, Barbara Lee Van Horsen. During the meeting Monday, more than 50 people were in the gallery, with 31 voicing support for the Momentum Center, 10 voicing opposition. Van Horsen's organization was accused of pushing a political agenda, using clients as social experiments, and spouting diversity, equity, and inclusion propaganda. Vanessa Wilhelm of Grand Haven Township said, quote, "There's no hard data. Everything is just a mystery. We want to know our money is going to something productive." End of quote. Renee Layton of Robinson Township said, quote, "We need to be sure that what we support meets our community's desires, not propaganda, be any sex you want to be. We want parameters on what you will and won't support because all of that stuff is lies." End of quote. Oh, so these people are a bunch of bigots. Got it. Supporters of the Momentum Center say the criticism is simply fear-mongering coming from those who don't support inclusion of the LGBTQ+ community. Eric Soy of Zeeland Township said, quote, "These issues are trickling in from the big board." End of quote. He's, of course, when he says big board, he's referring to the Ottawa Impact Commissioner's comments labeling diversity, equity, and inclusion programs Marxist and local pride events grooming. He added, quote, "These morality tests are working their way in. If your lifestyle is in line with what mine is, if the county has the money for excessive legal fees and settlements, then there's enough money for social recreation programs." End of quote. The Momentum Center was one of 4 programs whose funding was put in jeopardy in September. The others included Heritage Homes Incorporated's $216,000 contract, a $138,499.92 contract for Indian Trails Camp's ICAS Life Enrichment, and an $81,364.72 contract for Pioneer Resources. All four organizations rely on the county's mental health millage as their primary source of funding, according to budget details. In March 2016, Ottawa County voters approved a 10-year mental health millage, which generates an estimated $3.2 million annually. The Momentum Center's roughly $290,000 contract comprises about 43% of the organization's budget. In September, the Ottawa Impact backed commissioners on the CMH board, Sylvia Rodea, Gretchen Cosby, and Lucy Ebel, wanted to delay approving all four contracts for further review, but funding would have expired. At that meeting, board member Christian Kleinjans, who recently announced his candidacy in a special recall election against Ebel, suggested approving funding for 3 months. Since then, the matter has been taken up by CMH Millage Steering Committee, which plans to make a recommendation. The board planned to discuss a 1-month extension Monday at the recommendation of CMH Executive Director Lynn Doyle, but several board members felt it was unfair to the organizations. Board member Terry Goldberg deviated from the stated resolution and instead moved to fund all four programs for the current fiscal year, saying more time won't change the position of the Ottawa Impact Aligned members on the board. He said, quote, "There are people here where data isn't going to change their mind. They're convinced the Momentum Center is trying to indoctrinate people and is turning them into socialists," end of quote. He said organizations shouldn't have to fear their funding could be withdrawn from month to month. He added, quote, "Why are we becoming the masters of delay? We're stringing people along," end of quote. New board member Stephen Rockman said he wanted to present his evidence to the board about the Momentum Center, displaying to the room what he said was a picture of Van Horsen attending a drag queen event. Kleinjans cut in and said, quote, "Does this have anything to do with social recreation programs?" End of quote. "No," Rockman said. Kleinjans then responded, quote, "Then why are we talking about it?" End of quote. Kleinjans suggested a middle-of-the-road option, proposing to amend Goldberg's motion to a 6-month funding extension to allow the steering committee enough time to evaluate and come up with a recommendation. When no other board member seconded his motion, the measure failed. The board then tied in a 4-4 vote on Goldberg's original motion to fund the programs through the fiscal year. Goldberg, Kleinjans, David Parnan, and Chair Vonnie Vanderswag voted yes, while Cosby, Ebel, Rockman, and Donna Bunsey voted no. Rodea left the meeting before the vote was taken. After that vote, Kleinjans reintroduced the 6-month proposal as its own resolution, which would guarantee funding for the first 2 quarters of 2024 through June 30th. The motion was approved 5-3 with Bunsey, Goldberg, Kleinjans, Parnan, and Vanderswag voting yes, Cosby, Ebel, and Rockman voting no. Van Horsen said she's disturbed by the attacks she and the center have received and welcomes more productive conversations to promote understanding of the center and its work. She said, quote, "There were too many accusations levied against the center and against me personally tonight for me to be able to address those in 3 minutes. But I also want to urge and encourage people to contact me. I want to answer those questions. I want to have those conversations," end of quote. And good on her, because maybe she can change some minds of some of these bigots. And I tell you what, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag for next week's show. We're going to have a discussion. This story just came out a couple of days ago. There's a couple out of Rockford, Michigan, that has pulled their child out of the public schools, put them into homeschooling. They have now sued the Rockford Public Schools District because their child went to counselors to ask for teachers to use preferred pronouns when addressing that person. We'll talk about that next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.